"You are a traitor," yelled the boy. "You are a salt criminal. You are a Eurasian spy. I'm shooting you. I will vaporize you. I will send you to the salt mines." Suddenly, they were both leaping round him, shouting "Traitor!" and "Salt criminal!" The little girl imitating her brother in every moment. It was somehow slightly frightened, like the gambling of tiger cubs, which will soon grow up into man-eaters. There was a sort of calculating ferocity in the boy's eye, a quite evident desire to hit or kick Winston, and a consciousness of being very nearly big enough to do so. It was a good job it was not a real pistol he was holding, Winston thought. Mrs. Parsons' eyes flitted nervously from Winston to the children, and back again. In the better light of the living room, he noticed with interest that there actually was dust in the creases of her face. "They do get so nasty," he said. "They are disappointed they couldn't get because they couldn't go to see the honey. That's what it is. I'm too busy to take them, and Tom won't be back from work in time." "Why can't we go and see the honey?" roared the boy in his huge voice. "Want to see the honey! Want to see the honey!" chanted the little girl, still keeping round. Some Eurasian prisoner, guilty of war crimes, were to be hanged in the park that evening, Winston remembered. This happened about once a month, and was a popular spectacle. Children always clamored to be taken to see it. He took his leave of Mrs. Parsons and made for the door, but he had not gone 6 steps down the passage when something hit the back of his neck, an agonizing, painful blow. It was as though a red-hot wire had been jammed into him. He spun round just in time to see Mrs. Parsons dragging her son back into the doorway while the boy pocketed a catapult. "Golden Stain!" bellowed the boy as the door closed on him. But what was struck Winston was the look of helpless fright on the woman's Grace's face. Back in the flat, he stepped quickly past the telescreen and sat down at the table again, still rubbing his neck. The music from the telescreen had stopped. Instead, a clipped military voice was reading out with a sort of brutal relish, a description of the armament, of the new floating fortress, which had just been anchored between Ireland and the Faroe Islands. With those children, he thought, that the wretched woman must lead a life of terror. Another year, 2 years, and they would be watching her night and day for symptoms. Day and night for symptoms. Night and day for symptoms of unorthodox. Nearly all children nowadays were horrible. What was worst of all was that by means of such organization as the Spires, they were systematically turned into ungovernable little savages. And yet, this produced in them no tendency whatever to rebel against the discipline of the party. On the contrary, they adored the party and everything connected with it: the song, the processions, the banners, the hiking, the drilling with the dummy rifles, the yelling of slogans, the worship of Big Brother. It was all a sort of glory game to them. all their
ferocity,
ferocity, all their ferocity was turned outwards against the enemy of the state, against the foreigners, traitors, saboteurs,
saboteurs,
thought criminals. It was almost normal for people over 30 to be frightened of their own children, and with good reason, for hardly a week passed in which the Times did not carry on a paragraph describing how some eavesdropping little sneak child here was the phrase generally used, have overheard some compromising remark and denounced its parents to the salt policy. The stealing of the catapult bullet had worn off. He picked up his pen half-heartedly, wondering whether he could find something more to write in the diary. Suddenly, he began thinking of O'Brien again. Years ago, how long was it? 7 years it must be. He had dreamed that he was walking through a pitch-dark room, and someone sitting to one side of him had said as he passed, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." It was said very quietly, almost cautiously, a statement, not a command. He had walked on without pausing. What was curious was that at the time, in the dream, the words had not made such impression on him. It was only later, and by degrees, that they had seemed to take on significance. He could not know remember whether it was before or after having the dream that he had seen O'Brien from the first time, nor could he remember when he had first identified the voice as O'Brien's. But, at any rate, the identification existed. It was O'Brien who had spoken to him out of the dark. Winston had never been able to feel such even after this morning's flash of the eyes. It was still impossible to be sure whether O'Brien was a friend or an enemy, nor did it even seem to matter greatly. There was a link of understanding between them, more important than affection or partisanship. Than affection or partisanship. "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," he had said. Winston did not know what it meant, only that in some way or another it would come true. The voice from the telescreen paused.
Trumpet.
A trumpet call, clear and beautiful, floated into the stagnant air. The voice continued
Raspingly.
The voice continued raspingly. "Attention! Your attention, please." A news flash had this moment arrived from the Malabar front. Our forces in South India had won a glory victory. I am authorized to see that the action we are now reporting may well bring the war within measurable distance of its end. Here is the news flash. Bad news coming, thought Winston, and sure enough, following on a gory description of the annihilation. Following on a gory description of the annihilation of a Eurasian army. Following on a gory description of the annihilation of a Eurasian army with stupendous figures are killed and prisoner, came the announcement that, as from next week, the chocolate ration would be reduced from 30 grams to 20 grams. From 30 grams to 20. From 30 grams to 20. Winston belched again. The gin was wearing off. Leaving a deflating feeling. The telescreen, perhaps to celebrate the Victoria, perhaps to draw the memory of the lost chocolate, crashed into Oceania. Tear for thee. You were supposed to stand to attention. However, in his present position, he was invisible. Oceania. Tear for thee. Give way to lighter music. Winston walked over to the window, keeping his back to the telescreen. The day was still cold and clear. Somewhere far away, a rocket bomb exploded with the jaw, reverberating roar. About 20 or 30 of them awake were falling on London at present. Down in the street, the wind flapped the tall poster to and fro, and the word Igsock fitfully appeared, and the word Ingersoll fitfully appeared and vanished. In Ingsoc, the scared principles of Ingsoc newspeak double-think the mutability of the past. He felt as though he were wandering in the forest of the sea bottom, lost in a monstrous world where he himself was the monster. He was alone. The past was dead. The future was unimaginable. The future was unimaginable. What certainty had he had a single human creature no living was in his sight? And what way or knowing that the dominion of the party would not endure forever? Like an answer, the three slogans on the white face of the Minister of Truth came back to him. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. He took a 25-cent piece out of his pocket. There, too, in tiny clear writing, the same slogan were inscribed. And on the other face of the coin, he had a big brother. Even from the coin, the eyes pursued you. On coins, on stamps, on the covers of books, on banners, on posters, and on the wrapping of a secret packet everywhere. Always the eyes watching you and the voice enveloping. And the voice enveloping you, asleep or awake, working or eating, indoors or out of doors, in the bath or in bed no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your stomach. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters inside your skull.